Archaeoastronomy is the study of how people in the past have understood the phenomena in the sky, how they used these phenomena, and what role the sky played in their cultures. Clive Ruggles argues it is misleading to consider archaeoastronomy to be the study of ancient astronomy, as modern astronomy is a scientific discipline, while archaeoastronomy considers symbolically rich cultural interpretations of phenomena in the sky by other cultures. It is often twinned with ethnoastronomy, the anthropological study of skywatching in contemporary societies. Archaeoastronomy is also closely associated with historical astronomy, the use of historical records of heavenly events to answer astronomical problems, and the history of astronomy, which uses written records to evaluate past astronomical practice. Archaeoastronomy uses a variety of methods to uncover evidence of past practices, including archaeology, anthropology, astronomy, statistics and probability, and history. Because these methods are diverse and use data from such different sources, integrating them into a coherent argument has been a long-term difficulty for archaeoastronomers. Archaeoastronomy fills complementary niches in landscape archaeology and cognitive archaeology. Material evidence and its connection to the sky can reveal how a wider landscape can be integrated into beliefs about the cycles of nature, such as Mayan astronomy and its relationship with agriculture. Archaeoastronomy can be applied to all cultures and all time periods. The meanings of the sky vary from culture to culture. Nevertheless, there are scientific methods which can be applied across cultures when examining ancient beliefs. It is perhaps the need to balance the social and scientific aspects of archaeoastronomy which led Clive Ruggles to describe it as a field with academic work of high quality at one end but uncontrolled speculation bordering on lunacy at the other. History of archaeoastronomy. In his short history of astroarchaeology, John Mitchell argued that the status of research into ancient astronomy had improved over the past 2 centuries, going from lunacy to heresy to interesting notion and finally to the gates of orthodoxy. Nearly 2 decades later, we can still ask the question, is archaeoastronomy still waiting at the gates of orthodoxy, or has it gotten inside the gates? Todd Bostwick, quoting John Mitchell: 200 years before Mitchell wrote the above, there were no archaeoastronomers and there were no professional archaeologists, but there were astronomers and antiquarians. Some of their works are considered precursors of archaeoastronomy. Antiquarians interpreted the astronomical orientation of the ruins that dotted the English countryside, as William Stukeley did of Stonehenge in 1740. While John Aubrey in 1678 and Henry Chauncey in 1700 sought similar astronomical principles underlying the orientation of churches. Late in the 19th century, astronomers such as Richard Proctor and Charles Piazzi Smith investigated the astronomical orientations of the pyramids. The term archaeoastronomy was first used by Elizabeth Chesley Beatty in 1973, but as a topic of study it may be much older, depending on how archaeoastronomy is defined. Clive Ruggles says that Heinrich Nissen, working in the mid-19th century, was arguably the first archaeoastronomer. Rolf Sinclair says that Norman Lockyer, working in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, could be called the father of archaeoastronomy. Ewan Mackey would place the origin even later, stating, "The genesis and modern flowering of archaeoastronomy must surely lie in the work of Alexander Thom in Britain between the 1930s and the 1970s. In the 1960s the work of the engineer Alexander Thom and that of the astronomer Gerald Hawkins, who proposed that Stonehenge was a Neolithic computer, inspired new interest in the astronomical features of ancient sites. The claims of Hawkins were largely dismissed, but this was not the case for Alexander Thom's work, whose survey results of megalithic sites hypothesized widespread practice of accurate astronomy in the British Isles. Ewan Mackey, recognizing that Tom's theories needed to be tested, excavated at the Kintraw Standing Stone site in Argyllshire in 1970 and 1971 to check whether the latter's prediction of an observation platform on the hill slope above the stone was correct. There was an artificial platform there, and this apparent verification of Tom's long alignment hypothesis led him to check Tom's geometrical theories at the Cultian Stone Circle in Islay, also with a positive result. Mackey therefore broadly accepted Tom's conclusions and published new prehistories of Britain. In contrast, a re-evaluation of Tom's fieldwork by Clive Ruggles argued that Tom's claims of high-accuracy astronomy were not fully supported by the evidence. Nevertheless, Tom's legacy remained strong. Krupp wrote in 1979, "Almost single-handedly he has established the standards for archaeoastronomical field work and interpretation, and his amazing results have stirred controversy during the last 3 decades. His influence endures, and practice of statistical testing of data remains one of the methods of archaeoastronomy." The approach in the New World, where anthropologists began to consider more fully the role of astronomy in Amerindian civilizations, was markedly different. They had access to sources that the prehistory of Europe lacked, such as ethnographies and the historical records of the early colonizers, following the pioneering example of Antony of Eni. This allowed New World archaeoastronomers to make claims for motives which in the Old World would have been mere speculation. The concentration on historical data led to some claims of high accuracy that were comparatively weak when compared to the statistically led investigations in Europe. This came to a head at a meeting sponsored by the International Astronomical Union in Oxford in 1981. The methodologies and research questions of the participants were considered so different that the conference proceedings were published as 2 volumes. Nevertheless, the conference was considered a success in bringing researchers together, and Oxford conferences have continued every 4 or 5 years, at locations around the world. The subsequent conferences have resulted in a move to more interdisciplinary approaches, with researchers aiming to combine the contextuality of archaeological research, which broadly describes the state of archaeoastronomy today, rather than merely establishing the existence of ancient astronomies. Archaeoastronomers seek to explain why people would have an interest in the night sky. Relations to other disciplines. One of the most endearing characteristics of archaeoastronomy is its capacity to set academics in different disciplines at loggerheads with each other. Clive Ruggles' archaeoastronomy has long been seen as an interdisciplinary field that uses written and unwritten evidence to study the astronomies of other cultures. As such, it can be seen as connecting other disciplinary approaches for investigating ancient astronomy. Astroarchaeology, history of astronomy, and ethnoastronomy, reflecting archaeoastronomy's development as an interdisciplinary subject. Research in the field is conducted by investigators trained in a wide range of disciplines. Authors of recent doctoral dissertations have described their work as concerned with the fields of archaeology and cultural anthropology, with various fields of history including the history of specific regions and periods, the history of science and the history of religion, and with the relation of astronomy to art, literature and religion. Only rarely did they describe their work as astronomical, and then only as a secondary category. Both practicing archaeoastronomers and observers of the discipline approach it from different perspectives. George Gummerman and Miranda Warburton view archaeoastronomy as part of an archaeology informed by cultural anthropology and aimed at understanding the group's conception of themselves in relation to the heavens. In a word, it's cosmology. Todd Bostwick argued that archaeoastronomy is anthropology, the study of human behavior in the past and present. Paul Barn has described archaeoastronomy as an area of cognitive archaeology. Other researchers relate archaeoastronomy to the history of science, either as it relates to a culture's observations of nature and the conceptual framework they devise to impose an order on those observations, or as It relates to the political motives which drove particular historical actors to deploy certain astronomical concepts or techniques. Art historian Richard Post took a more flexible approach, maintaining that the astronomical rock art of the North American Southwest should be read employing the hermeneutic traditions of Western art history and art criticism. Astronomers, however, raise different questions, seeking to provide their students with identifiable precursors of their discipline, and are especially concerned with the important question of how to confirm that specific sites are, indeed, intentionally astronomical. The reactions of professional archaeologists to archaeoastronomy have been decidedly mixed, some expressed incomprehension or even hostility, varying from a rejection by the archaeological mainstream of what they saw as an archaeoastronomical fringe to an incomprehension between the cultural focus of archaeologists and the quantitative focus of early archaeoastronomers. Yet archaeologists have increasingly come to incorporate many of the insights from archaeoastronomy into archaeology textbooks and, as mentioned above, some students wrote archaeology dissertations on archaeoastronomical topics. Since archaeoastronomers disagree so widely on the characterization of the discipline, they even dispute its name. All three major international scholarly associations relate archaeoastronomy to the study of culture, using the term astronomy and culture or a translation. Michael Hoskins sees an important part of the discipline as fact-collecting, rather than theorizing, and proposed to label this aspect of the discipline archaeotopography. Ruggles and Saunders proposed cultural astronomy as a unifying term for the various methods of studying folk astronomies. Others have argued that astronomy is an inaccurate term. What are being studied are cosmologies, and people who object to the use of logos have suggested adopting the Spanish cosmovision. When debates polarize between techniques, the methods are often referred to by a color code, based on the colors of the bindings of the two volumes from the First Oxford Conference, where the approaches were first distinguished. Green archaeoastronomers rely heavily on statistics and are sometimes accused of missing the cultural context of what is a social practice. Brown archaeoastronomers, in contrast, have abundant ethnographic and historical evidence and have been described as cavalier on matters of measurement and statistical analysis. Finding a way to integrate various approaches has been a subject of much discussion since the early 1990s.